Hello again, welcome back to my studio. In this demonstration I'm going to work on plum blossom. So we've got a typical sort of example of Chinese brush painting of the plum blossom here. And I'm going to work through this demonstration so that you can follow along if you want to. So let's look at the things you'll need in order to do that. I suggest you have at least 2 or 3 pieces of paper to hand. Chinese rice paper, Chinese painting paper, and mine is cut to A4 in size. It originally came on a long roll and I've cut it down to pieces of A4 size. You'll need an absorbent surface to work on. I'm using felt, but you could use some other sort of absorbent cloth. Some water jars, some paperweights, some pieces of kitchen towel. I'm using some bottled Chinese ink that I've poured out from the bottle into a little container. If you want to use colour, the colour that I'm using today is the Marie's Chinese painting colour Rouge, which is a sort of a bluish pink, and in the set I have it's numbered 400, so number 400 in the Marie's painting set, or a Rouge, which is a sort of a bluish pink. You'll need a saucer or a plate to work on, and I've got some brushes here. You can do the whole lesson with one brush, which, you know, if you've only got one Chinese painting brush, but I've got a selection here that will make it a little bit easier for you. I've got a white haired and a dark haired brush in medium size, and by medium I mean the hair length is 2 to 3 centimeters long, and I've got a smaller dark haired brush and the hair length there is about 1.5 centimeters long. So let's start off with looking at doing the branches. So we'll have a piece, I suggest you have a piece of practice paper to sort of try out the technique on, and then another piece of paper to do your painting on. The plum blossom is one of what the Chinese call the 4 gentlemen. The 4 gentlemen being the plum blossom, the orchid, the bamboo and the chrysanthemum, and these are subjects that are generally taught as a way of learning the basic techniques of Chinese brush painting. In this lesson, the plum blossom will teach us a little bit about the bone and the boneless technique, as the Chinese would call it. By that they mean, when they talk about bone technique, they're meaning that there's line drawing is used, and when they're talking about boneless technique, it means that the brush is used to make the shape of the motif rather than line work. So I'm going to start by preparing my dark haired brush with by washing it out, giving it a good thorough wash just to wet the hairs so that they become a little bit more pliant. And then I'm going to dry the brush out on my kitchen towel, and as usual I'll rotate the brush in my fingers as I do that so that I get a nice point on the brush. always encourage your brush to come back to a point. Now we need to load some ink. So I'm going to load quite a bit of ink into the brush for the branches, and give the brush a wipe so that it doesn't drip. And we're going to then dry the brush off a little bit, so take some of that ink out of the brush, because we're going to use a technique called flying white. So to paint the branch, we're using what the Chinese would call boneless technique. In other words, we're not using two lines to define either side of the branch. We're using the brush to make the shape. And in order to get the textured effect of the branch, we're going to encourage the brush hairs to split. So if we move, we'll just review the brush grip. So we want 2 fingers behind the brush, 2 in front, and bring the thumb in, and then soften the fingers so that you can comfortably maneuver the brush. So far we've probably been using the brush mostly in this upright position, but to use the flying white technique, I'm going to tip the brush over and use it on its side, and having taken some of the ink out of the brush, we should get quite a broken line that we can use to depict our branch, our plum blossom branch. If you aren't getting this sort of broken effect, try drying your brush a little bit more on the paper towel, and also you can encourage the brush to split a bit with by gently teasing out the tip of the brush. Don't, however, squeeze the brush here or you will damage it. Only ever this end here can be gently teased out. So we're looking for this sort of broken brush stroke, which the Chinese call flying white, which is a really good stroke for depicting plum blossom branches. So let's have a go at putting that on our painting. I'm refreshing the amount of ink I have on the brush, but again I'm dabbing it off on my paper towel, and you can split the brush tip a little bit as well with your fingertip if you wish to further encourage that. Now when we paint, when we're doing this painting, we don't want the branch to come out of the corner of our paper. That doesn't look, it looks rather awkward. It's much better to come in a little bit from the corner and start away from the corner. The other thing to think about is that we want a diagonal sort of, I'm using a diagonal composition here, so you may want to make a fingernail mark that runs diagonally across to the lower right hand corner of your painting. We also want to try and leave a few little gaps to put the flowers in for the next step. So tipping the brush on its side, coming away from the corner, I'm going to start painting that branch. Dropping down towards the left hand side now, and I'm going to leave a gap there and come back maybe and put a little bit more in, but I'm stopping before I get to this lower right hand corner, because I want to leave a bit of space there, and I'll probably put a seal there later. So the other thing we need to do then, having done the sort of old branch on our tree, maybe is to do some younger branches. So these would be done with more ink on the brush. So I'm reloading the brush now and taking off that surplus ink, and I'm going to do some side branches which will have support the flowers. So I've used the brush on its side. I'm now going to go back to using it on the sort of upright position, or on tiptoe. You may again want to make a few fingernail marks where your branches are going to go, and don't forget to leave a gap where you're putting the flowers. So to start the branch, I go to the old bark of the branch, press the tip of the brush down, keeping it upright, then we travel, change direction, travel, lift. I'm going to put some flowers in there, and then we'll have a little bit more branch there. Over here, press the brush down to join it, the branch to the main branch, travel, lift, leave a gap for the blossoms, travel, leave a gap for the blossoms. We'll put a little bit of branch here, and leaving a gap there, we'll maybe have another branch there. The final thing I'm going to do to finish the branch off is put in some moss dots, and these are just made with the point of the brush, pressed down quickly and lifted up again, and you can put these in where you feel the branch perhaps needs a little bit of extra interest. We often put these in at the end of the painting as well to sort of help balance the painting, but I'm going to put a few in now while I've got this larger brush in my hand, just so that you can see how they're made. So let's look at the flowers then. I'm going to wash that ink out of my brush. Never leave ink in your brush because it'll ruin it. Always wash it out well. So this is why you need more than one jar of water, because you can see how that's completely dark now, and it would be no use for working and mixing colour. And I've got a second jar there to finish rinsing that brush out. So I'm going to switch now to my much smaller brush, and let's mix some paler ink to draw the flowers. So I've got a little bit of ink on my plate or my palette, and put some water into that to mix a much paler colour. I'm then going to dry my brush out a bit on the paper towel. If you don't have a smaller brush, you can still do this. It will be a little bit more tricky because you'll have to make sure you get all the water out of the tummy part of the brush, of the bigger brush, which will take a little bit longer to do than getting it out of a smaller brush. So let's go back to our practice piece of paper and look at how we draw the petals. So I'm going to draw the flowers bigger so that you can see what I'm doing. but you'll obviously want to do them a little bit smaller than I'm demonstrating them. So we want to hold the brush in the upright position, and we're going to now use what the Chinese would call bone technique. In other words, we're going to use a line to depict the petals of the flowers. So the stroke we use is we do a little press and then we travel around in a half semicircle. Press, travel around in a half semicircle. So you may find that your brush is putting too much ink onto the paper, in which case you need to dry it off and try again until you get a nice clean line. So if this were, we would turn this into a bud if this was where we were going to finish this particular flower, but we can of course continue to add more petals and turn it into a flower. So that's one view. Piece of practice paper, because I want you to be able to clearly see what I'm doing, but you're probably working smaller, so you don't have to do that. So another way, another view if you like, or another posture would be to press and come round with that first one, press and come round there. So that's the starting point again, and then we could put a second petal next to that first one, just reloading my brush. And if, like me, your brush is tending to split a bit, just bring it back to the point with your finger and thumb, and then we can put 3 petals behind. If we imagine those 2 are in front, we can put 3 petals behind. 1, 2, 3. So this would give us then another view. So I'm going to look at one more view perhaps, and then we'll look at some other details. So the view that is perhaps the most challenging to paint is the full face view. In other words, the flower fully open and we're looking at it face on. So the plum blossom has 5 petals, and the difficult part really is to get round all the way round that sort of circular shape with the 5 petals sort of fairly evenly spaced. So the way I tend to help myself with doing that is I think of it as a person doing what's often called a star jump. So they've got their head and then the 2 arms and the 2 legs are outstretched. So I find that quite helpful to think about the position. So we start with that first petal again. This is, if you like, if you imagine this is the head, and you can see that I've only drawn half of that, the side here, but I've drawn a little loop on the end of this one here. So that's the first petal. The next one, this would be like the person's arm. So we come press and come round, press and come round, and again a loop. So then if the person is there, there's the head, arm, this one would be their leg. So again, press and half way round, press and come round in a loop. So that's our third petal. This would be the other leg, press and come round, press and loop. And the last petal, the other arm as it were, press and halfway round, press and come round in a loop. And that gives us the full face view when we've finished putting the details on. It could also be a back view. So maybe let's practice that one again for a little bit of extra practice. And I'll show you how you would make it either the front face view or the back view. So you know, if you want to practice them at this scale because you find it easy, you can do that and then work to the sort of actual size later. That's another way of practicing and learning. But I'm just doing them this big so that you can hopefully clearly see what I'm doing. So here's the first petal, or the head. We come press and come round, and you'll see that I keep the brush upright for all of this part of the painting. Press and come round and make that little loop shape. Press and come round. My brush is splitting a bit, let's just pull that back together. Press and come round and make a loop. The other thing to work at, apart from the control of the moisture on the brush, which you'll probably find a little bit challenging if you're a beginner with this subject, to get the brush moisture level correct. The other thing that's a bit challenging is ideally you want to try and keep your elbow sort of off the table so that you're not locked down on the table, so the arm has freedom to move. So this is the third petal. Press and come round, press and come round in a loop. 1, 2, 3, petal number 4, or if you think about it, the other leg, if you're thinking about it that way. Press and come round, press and come round, there's the loop. And the last petal, press and come round, press and come round, and there's the loop. So that's the sort of basic structure in place for 3 different views of the flower. Now let's have a look at putting some details in so that we can turn them into the fully finished flower. So I'm going to switch to my dark haired medium brush for this because of the scale that I'm doing these on. But if you've done yours sort of the actual size they will be, I suggest you stick with your small brush. So I'm just loading up my brush now with the very thick dark ink, undiluted. If you need to do a little bit of blotting on your tissue paper to make sure you've got good control of the ink, that when you put your brush down it doesn't run everywhere, you may need to do that. And then we're going to paint the sepals on these 3 flowers. So for this view we're imagining that it's going to join the branch sort of about here. So we do press and come towards the branch, lifting up, press and come towards the branch, lifting up. and that gives us sort of the idea of the sepals. For the one I've done that we can imagine this is going to be the back view, we would see a different arrangement. So if the branch, for example, travels across here somewhere, we would then join it up, press, come in towards the branch, press, come in towards the branch, 3, 4, 5, and that gives us the back view of our flower. For this full face view, we're going to see the centre of the flower and the pollen dots. So let's have a look at drawing those in. So we start with the brush on its tiptoe upright, and we draw 2 half semicircles in the middle. Press and come round, press and come round. And then do the stamens. I don't think it really matters too much which way you go, whether you come from the ring outwards or from the outwards in, but you do want to have a nice sort of strong upright brush action so that they have strength to them. So a long stop, a long stop, a long stop. You want a definite stopping point to each stroke. And then the pollen dots we do in a sort of a triangular pattern. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All the way around. For this view, we might just see a little bit of that middle section there peeping through. A few stamens. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that's the pollen dots for that one. If you can't understand what I mean about the triangle, if I draw them there, there's the triangles, but it's just a way of getting a rhythm going when you're applying the dots. So in part 2 we'll look at how to put this into our painting so that we can put the flowers on the painting and maybe a little bit of colour as well. So hopefully I'll see you in part 2.